Here is my golden duolingo tree. Is it still right to call it a tree with the new update? But here it is. I finished the entire path, got them all to gold. Not yet legendary, but gold. And here is my Duolingo Indonesian trophy. Back then, it used to be a golden owl and a congratulatory note, but now they have this blue moving trophy. So here it is. Little background about me: I live in the Philippines, just a little bit of Indonesia. In the Philippines, there is an estimate of about 120 languages, which means you move from one place to another and are speaking another language. Among these languages, my native language is Bicol. The Bicol languages are a group of Central Philippine languages spoken mostly in the Bicol Peninsula and the island of Luzon. Now, Bicol is divided into a lot more dialects depending on where you're from. And the dialect of Bicol I specifically speak is Bisacol. It's a combination of Bicol and Bisaya because we're like at the very tip of Luzon and Visayas is really, really near. So my native language is Bicol, but since the Philippines is so multicultural, we need a lingua franca so we can all understand each other, and that's how I know Tagalog. Tagalog is used in media, literature, education, etc. Two Austronesian languages down, Tagalog and Bicol, and throughout the video I will go more in depth about the learning process given the fact that I already know these languages. Just a quick side note that the two Austronesian languages I know, due to colonization, has been influenced by Spanish and English. So that's always something I had to keep in mind while learning Indonesian. So why did I decide to learn Bahasa Indonesia? If you didn't know, I learned Spanish before. In my video, I learned the colonizer's tongue willingly. I was rediscovering the roots of the language I was speaking, which words came from Spain, which words are originally from this area. So that's a really mind-stimulating thing that I did. For this one, I wanted to go the other route. I learned about the West and their influences on my language. Now I wanted to learn about the language of the neighboring country. This time I am solidifying the understanding of my languages and connection with them by learning a similar related language. From what I know, the Malay language was the lingua franca of the Philippines prior to Spanish rule. It was used a lot for trade. But because of colonization, now only a really small percentage of people in my country can speak Malay. So I did my research. The two standardized varieties of Malay are Bahasa Melayu and Bahasa Indonesia. But this is more political than linguistic since they're apparently pretty much mutually intelligible. I decided to learn Bahasa Indonesia since it was the one available on Duolingo. And so my language learning journey began. Am I fluent in Bahasa Indonesia? No, I'm not. I wish I was. I did not touch any other learning resource aside from Duolingo and maybe memorize a little bit. And I'm not gonna get fluent from that alone. How long did it take me to finish the course? I wish I could give you a set answer, but I was going back and forth with the language. I kept on stopping because I had university, and I would go on again and stop and go on again. I was not consistent with it, but I did it. I finished the course. And upon finishing the course and throughout the process as well, I had a lot of thoughts and realizations from the learning experience. How was it? I would describe learning Indonesian as relearning Tagalog and Bicol. The combination and order of the letters were familiar, the words were familiar, the pronunciation sounded familiar, but it was different. It was like relearning Tagalog and Bicol in a way that there were a lot of interlingual homographs. An interlingual homograph is a word that occurs in more than one written language but has a different meaning or pronunciation in each language. Homonyms, but like in different languages. I will explain it more in depth, but let's start with this. The word on the screen, depending if you're Indonesian or Tagalog or Bicolano, would have a different meaning or pronunciation. In Tagalog, lupa means soil or ground. In Bicol, lupa means rotten. In Indonesian, it's lupa, which means forget. So do you see what's going on? This is a very common thing that happens. Side note, I actually kept a list of similar sounding words or words that are the same in the beginning, but I stopped because there was just so many. To be fair, Tagalog and Bicol, not yet comparing it to Indonesian, are already very similar. For example, tanga is idiot in Filipino and tanga is ant in Bicol. So I'm sharing with you this list. See, look at this. But to make this more organized, I made another more systematic list. If by any chance there are Indonesian viewers watching this video, I'm very, very sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. I tried. For interlingual homographs, we have kita, which means we are or us in Indonesian. In Bicol, it's pronounced kita. which means to see. And for Tagalog, it can mean three things. Kita, which means earning, to see, or you. Other words are hari, which is king in Tagalog, and hari, which is day in Indonesian. Ingat, which means take care, and ingat, which means remember. Another word is alis, which means eyebrow in Indonesian, but in Filipino it's pronounced alis, which means leave. There's also hati-hati, which means be careful in Indonesian. In Filipino, it's hati-hati, which means let's share. Typical Indonesian interlingual homographs, we have this. In Indonesian, ayam means chicken, but ayam in Bicol is dog. In Indonesian, mati means to die, while in Bicol, mate means to listen, or mate, which is checkmate. In Indonesian, lumayan means reasonable, while in Bicol, when you say lumayan, it means to make it softer. So we got that. Interlingual homographs, same word, different meaning and pronunciation. But there are also words that are the same in spelling, the same in meaning, they just differ by pronunciation, and sometimes they don't vary at all. For example, in Tagalog, it's pronounced anak, but in Indonesian, it's pronounced anak. In Filipino, it's pronounced lima, but in Indonesian, it's pronounced lima. In Tagalog, it's pronounced mata, which also means eye, but in Indonesian, it's pronounced mata. Can you see how it goes? For Bicol Indonesian, we have buka, which is open Indonesian, but in Bicol, it's pronounced buka. In Indonesian, bone is pronounced as tulang, while in Bicol, it's pronounced as tulang. But words like surat, kulit, and hilang are pretty much the same pronunciation and the same in spelling and meaning. So, like, all the same. Aside from that, we also have words that are off by one or two letters, but pretty much have the same meaning. I found that this category might have the most out of everything. Now, don't trust me on that. That's just based on my observation. Like, empat, apat, enam, anim, otak, utak. You see how this entire thing is going. For Bicol Indonesian, there are also a lot of words, actually. They pronounce it as telinga, but in Bicol it's pronounced as talinga. They pronounce it as kucing, but we pronounce it as kuting. They pronounce it as jalan, but we pronounce it as dalan. And there are words that aren't exactly the same, but they're so related, you know they're related. They sound very similar, so much that you would get the meaning immediately if you try hard enough. Like, I'd give you 5 seconds. If you're Indonesian or Filipino, you'd get the meaning of the other related. For example, sanjata. What does it sound like in Filipino? Sandata, berita, balita, mulay, simula. Like, you know they're related in one way or another. And in Bicol Indonesian, there is sipulu, which is similar to how we say 10, napulo in Bicol. And they say hujan, we say uran. They say it as tinga, while we say tunga, which means middle. And of course, there are words that sound similar and look similar, but the meaning is just completely different. Some are even words that are off by one or two letters. You'd think they mean the same somehow, but the meanings are totally different. Tinggal means to stay, live, or remain. But tanggal in Filipino means to remove. Pikir, which means to think. In Filipino, it's pikit, which means to close your eyes. Keriput in Indonesian means wrinkly, while kuripot in Filipino means frugal. As you can see, they sound very similar. You really would think they're related if you hear them, but they're not. For example, we also have things like that in Bicol. They have malihat, which means to see, but in Bicol, malingat means get distracted. They have diri, which means self, but in Bicol it's diri, which means no. They have pohon, which means tree, but in Bicol it's poon, and it means start. Like, they sound really, really similar, don't they? In relation to this topic, I have a confession. Bicol isn't really a famous language. There's basically any learning resource. And we're not really taught the language the way we are taught Tagalog or English. If there are like 5 Tagalog learning resources, which is very, very few by the way, there's 0 in Bicol. There's no course that's like, learn Bicol with me, learn Bicol. Everything we know is like by mouth. So there are times where I thought, maybe the Indonesian way is actually how we should be writing it in Bicol. Is that possible? So I thought about that. Also, I thought about this. You know how we lost some words because of Spanish colonization? I thought maybe the Indonesian word is how my ancestors used to say it and we just lost it. Thoughts like that really flogged my mind. Anyway, basically, there are a lot of similar sounding words, a lot of cognates, isn't it? The pronunciation, the intonation, and general sound of the language are also similar. When I hear Indonesian, prior to me learning it, of course, I feel like I should be able to get it, but I don't. It sounds very similar, so I try and understand, but I don't get it at all. This can be attributed to Tagalog, Bicol, and Indonesian being members of the Western Malayo-Polynesian branch of the Austronesian language family. They developed from the same language, Proto-Malayo-Polynesian, but have been diverging from each other for more than 4,000 years. Although the words are similar, one thing I notice is the difference in sentence structure. Tagalog and Bicol seem to have the same sentence structure, which is predicate or verb, subject, and object. Indonesian, on the other hand, is subject, verb, object. Like with English. For example, we have the sentence, she eats rice. In Tagalog, this is, kumakain siya ng kanin. Verb, subject, object. In Bicol, it's similar. Nagkakaon siya sing kanon. But in Indonesian, it's dia makan nasi. Subject, verb, object. We can say it in that order though, like siya ay kumakain ng kanin, but it doesn't sound very natural. There are similarities in grammar though, like with pronouns. Anak ko, anak ko, bola niya, bola niya. With ours, we don't add it to the word. It's a different word on its own. And this is something I noticed. I was so happy when I noticed it. The an suffix is something that is common in both Tagalog, Bicol, and Indonesian. We add the an suffix to make something a noun. Makan is to eat. But what do you eat? Food. Makanan. Bermain. To play. What do you play? Games. Bermainan. This is the same with Tagalog and Bicol. Upo. To sit. Where do you sit? Upuan. Higa. To lay down. Where do you lay down? On the bed. Higaan. It's really fascinating to me. That's apparently a feature of Austronesian languages. And I'm going to share something that really blew my mind. We have this fruit, rambutan. It also grows in Southeast Asia. Upon learning Indonesian, I learned that rambut is hair. And the reason why it's named rambutan is because it's hairy. Rambutan. I didn't notice because rambut isn't a word in Tagalog nor Bicol. So I feel like my understanding of the world just expanded. But despite the similarities, I personally think the overall grammar is very different. Indonesian, I think, is simpler than Tagalog and Bicol. Of course, I don't have the experience of a Tagalog and Bicol learner because these languages come naturally to me. But looking at an outsider's perspective, I feel like it would be really hard to learn Tagalog and Bicol. For example, with verbs, for Indonesian, you add a specific word or words before the verb to show that it changed. The sentence is, you drink water. Kamu minum air. You will drink water. Kamu akan minum air. You are drinking water. Kamu sedang minum air. It doesn't have conjugation for tense or aspect. But with Tagalog and Bicol, it has conjugations for aspect. You know, this is something I really don't think I would get if I wasn't a native speaker because we have so many prefix, affix, suffix, infix, circumfix, and there are no rules when to use them and when you're going to use them. Kain, kumakain, kumain, kinain, nagpakain. You can add many different things in there and they would have different meanings. How do we know? Gut feel? That's really it. I think it's best explained through this Facebook post. You can pause to read. I won't be discussing it in detail. While I was learning, something that I actively took note of were the influences. With Tagalog and Bicol, we have English and Spanish as their influences. With Indonesian, what was their influence? At first, when I was learning the months, I thought, oh, they lost their months too, like us, because our months are in Spanish. Indonesian looks like it took from English. But upon further research, I learned that the English influences I thought were English influences were actually Dutch. Wow. We can never be free from colonizers, can we? This brings us to my next point. I noticed that Indonesia lost their scripts as well, just like the Philippines. We also had a lot of scripts back in the day, but right now we can't read it, we don't use it. I don't think we can use it properly the way it's supposed to be used. We lost it really. I noticed that this is the same with Indonesia. I looked it up and apparently they also had a lot of scripts back then, but due to colonization, they adopted the Latin alphabet as well as we have. Again, we can never be free from colonizers, can't we? To conclude, I feel like my knowledge and perspective of the world broadened a lot. I'm enlightened. I think it really helped that I know two other Austronesian languages. If I only knew Tagalog, I would not have found as many similarities as I have. Help that I know Bicol and the Bicol I speak is mixed with Bisaya. If I knew more Philippine languages, I know my understanding would be so much bigger. I acknowledge that Bahasa Indonesia is just one of the many languages of Indonesia, and Tagalog and Bicol are just two of the many Philippine languages. There can be other languages that are more related to each other than these languages are. Will I continue learning Indonesian now that I have finished my Indonesian tree? Yes, I will. Hopefully, I can give you more learning resources in the future. Bye. See you next time.